Hey guys, 2J's here. What up? So, I just wanted to touch on the topic of suffering once again. In my last video, I addressed the topic of suffering, and I just had a little more perspective to add. So, I wrote out a little something about suffering. Because there's suffering involved in life. There's a lot of suffering, some more than others. I'm not sure, or maybe, I don't know how much others suffer, but I know I suffer quite a bit in life. So it's like I wrote up this so do you, God and or Christ, this is me writing to them, suffer more? Really know my suffering and share in it? Being God, how could you? Because the Bible talks about, oh, Christ suffered for us and how much he suffers, and Christ suffered so much. It's all about like the suffering of God and Christ, but it's like, do they suffer more than us being human? Do they suffer more than their creation? Being God and Christ, how could they? When has God or Christ ever cried or bawled, wept, and suffered as much as I have, or felt they had to? There's no record of God or Christ ever bawling in agony from the loss of the woman he loved or the person he loved. Uncertain if he'll ever love again, having to be alone and knowing the suffering of having things not going according to his plan. There's the instance where he wept, he cried at when he saw Lazarus' sisters crying. It touched him, and he said that Jesus cried, but it wasn't like a bawling in agony and suffering kind of cry from what it's described as. So sometimes I wish my suffering was more like Christ's, a physical suffering all in one day, even though I'm sure he suffered in the desert as well and at other points in his life. But still, the suffering I go through daily and have been going through and enduring daily for years, for over a decade, is a prolonged kind of suffering that I'm unsure God or Jesus can relate to, have ever known or experienced except through me. The suffering of losing the woman you love and having to picture her with others and someone else for the rest of your life, or forever as far as you know, while being stuck in a post-traumatic state, reliving the thoughts over and over again, unsure if it will ever heal. And is that a suffering that you could ever know and experience other than through me, considering who you are, God and or Christ? Is your suffering ours, worse than ours? And could it really ever be for God or his son Christ, considering who you are? The suffering we go through as unknowing humans, or losing someone and all we love and never knowing or being sure if we will ever heal and it will ever get better, is a kind of suffering that how could God or Christ ever know, being who they are, what they know, how they can heal, how they could heal, the abilities. So like, they share in our human sufferings, but still our sufferings are different from theirs, simply considering who they are, what they know can do and heal in comparison to us, their abilities and what they know, so they never have to live in the fear of God or fear of not knowing, or the uncertainty of not knowing if you're ever going to heal, or if you're going to be judged and condemned. That they don't have that fear and suffering because of things not going according to their plan and to God's plan. So how could they ever suffer as much? And they're never under the threat of condemnation of sin in the same way, so it's so they would never suffer the same kind of pain, suffering, torture, not knowing, and uncertainty and loss. In that way, we seem to suffer more and must suffer more. Although we share in our sufferings, each of our sufferings are unfathomable. Each of our sufferings are unfathomable. Each of our sufferings are unfathomable. Like having to suffer trying to listen to me say that word and pronounce that word. Unfathomable. The suffering of not being able to pronounce that word correctly. The first time in a video. How could you ever know the suffering when you're perfect? So each of our sufferings are unfathomable to each other. With that being said and considered, how could God understand my suffering and my suffering of having to witness His suffering for me and us? How could I ever fathom His suffering, or of having to suffer me, us, and ours? But still, Him being God, I can't imagine His suffering being worse simply because He is God. And so, and doesn't have the same uncertainty of not knowing if the suffering will ever end or heal as we do. Considering that it appears that I and all suffer more than God or Christ do or ever will, except through us vicariously. With all that being said and considered, how could we ever understand and fathom God and Christ's suffering, and how could they ever understand and fathom ours? Because God knows all? How could God or His Son Christ ever know the pain and suffering of not being God or God's Son Christ and not knowing as they do, but having to suffer not being them? And in a human way, they never will or do, except maybe, like I said, vicariously through us. But still, that's not really human suffering, or having to suffer the fear of God, not being God, Christ, and the uncertainty of not knowing what they do and how they do. From that perspective and considering all those things, we suffer more than Christ or God does or ever could, because God, everything goes according to God's plan, and Jesus and God have the certainty of knowing that they're accepted, that they're not alone. They are in heaven with the angels and praise, and they have abilities that are beyond ours as far as we know. They have they don't ever have to live with the same not knowing. They they always have faith, hope, and all that for the future and this and that. Ours is uncertain. So how could they ever know that feeling or share in our suffering? That doesn't make sense, the Bible's always Christ suffered and so much and suffering. How could He ever suffer more than us? Being Christ, He's God's Son. He knows He's approved of the Father. He doesn't ever have to deal with the suffering of not knowing what His future is going to be, and what is to come, and what's in store for Him. If it's judgment or salvation or condemnation. For us, we have to live in the fear of God and not knowing what is going to happen to us. So Christ and God don't ever have that. And it's and then the commandment, let's say the commandment, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. That means speaking, to take someone's name in vain means to speak about them without due regard or respect for their abilities, beliefs, their rights, and all that. So, but we don't. How are we supposed to speak about God with the due respect and regard when there's always mystery surrounding God. We don't fully ever get to know God. There's things that are hidden from us about God that we don't know. Like there's all these unanswered questions about who he is and why he does what he does and all that. So like there's things that are hidden from us. So how are we ever supposed to know the proper respect and regard to speak about this character that's so mysterious to us? How could we ever, simply because we've heard the name God, and that's a word that demands respect and regard. We should be respectful when speaking. We don't, as a human, he's mysterious. To us, he's a total mystery to some of us, have no clue about him. You know what I mean? And then even the ones who do, there's still things hidden about him that are mysterious to us. There's always more questions and more to learn. So it's like there's things hidden about him. So how are we ever supposed to know how to speak of this character and respect this character? We don't know everything about him. What kind of respect or regard he's due, because he's so mysterious. So that part kind of doesn't make that much sense to me either. I'm like, if you really want me to respect you and show you the due respect and regard, then you'd have to show yourself and let me know you fully and what you're about and who you are, in which I can see that you're about love apparently and all this, but then I also witness all this suffering in the world, and you're the only one who has the authority apparently to wipe every tear away and take all the suffering away, yet there's still suffering. And why? Because of evil in the world? Because, so the decisions of Adam, Eve, Lucifer, so suffering and sin is inflicted on every being in existence now, except for you and your holy angels. But even you guys, there's suffering inflicted upon, because you have to suffer witnessing it all, and then Christ had to suffer to give us that warning. He didn't have to, but he chose to. The angels had to suffer warring against the evil angels, the demons and the devils, even though they're holy beings. I'm sure they don't like violence and going to war and things like that. So they had to suffer that. So it's how are we supposed to give due regard and speak respectfully of someone that we don't really know all about? We don't know them fully. We can try to, and we know as much as you reveal to us about yourself, but how are we ever supposed to fully know you? Fully love you and fully respect you and know what kind of respect you're due. Because you're loving and you sent your son and this and that, and we can see certain things about you, but it's that could be it seems like it's all set up, the suffering's there to glorify you and your son. You're glorified through your willingness to suffer for us, and you don't bring that suffering upon yourself, but apparently God gave the suffering to Jesus, and he's glorified for that suffering. Meanwhile, if God didn't put us, Adam or Eve, around the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then they wouldn't, they guarded it. He put angels with fiery swords to guard the tree after the fact of them falling into sin, instead of protecting them in the first place from falling into that sin. He gave them the warning, but he didn't give a warning about the serpent, and he didn't guard the tree. He gave them access, and then they fell into sin. So the circumstances were set up for us to fail, and then we fell into suffering, and now him and his son are glorified through that suffering. Meanwhile, we don't even know if you set up the whole situation just for us to try to glorify you. So we're is that us causing you suffering, or is that you causing us suffering, and to glorify you and your son through it, and place yourself above us to worship you for something that you set up. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, and we don't know these answers to these questions. So what is that? Taking his name in vain by not knowing and wondering these things and asking questions about it? You know what I mean? I don't know. So how am I supposed to speak respect? Like, I do my best. I'm not trying to accuse God of anything, or I don't know these things. So these are things I don't know. So how am I supposed to give respect to someone that you don't fully, that doesn't ever fully let you know him? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that you're, like, separate from, for the time being, in the physical. Yeah, spiritually, I can be one with him and know that he appears to be about love and this and that, but, like, why is there so much suffering then? And then how are we supposed to be thankful and praise that there's suffering and torture going on and sacrifice? Like, and, oh, it's necessary? You're God, you can do all things, so why is it necessary that others have to suffer, that we have to suffer, and why is all this suffering necessary? And if you're the only one who has the power and authority and gives it to your son to remove all suffering and wipe every tear away, then why are we praising you when we're still going through suffering when you could remove that suffering? So your will must be for us to be suffering this and experiencing this for some sort of purpose, hopefully, so that we have something to contrast, and we can, when we don't have suffering anymore, then we can be even more appreciative and thankful and not want to go back to sin. So, like, but still, from our perspective, and like, we're suffering, and we're humans, and we have uncertainty, and we're not knowing, and there's mystery around the whole everything, around the word, and like trying to puzzle over these things. So it's like, so how are we ever supposed to know the due regard and respect? So, like, that part kind of doesn't make sense to me. But as far as I know, it says that I can only hope. I hope that my name is in the book of life. I feel like I know, like, my name's in the book of life already, and God knows my name, you know. And but as far as I know, I don't hear God using my name in a disrespectful way, and being like, in taking my name in vain, and like speaking about me and my name in a disrespectful way. So I don't see why I would do that. You know, like, I don't see why I would use his name in vain and speak disrespectfully about him. You know what I mean? Like, I try not to. You know, because it's like, I don't see him, like, blaspheming me and my name. You know, so, like, I don't see why I would do that to him, you know. And it says he knows my name. Like, it says that God knows our name, and that hopefully when you believe that your name is in the book of life. So I know I believe in him and his son, so I know my name's in the book of life, and that I do my best to live according to their will and do their will every day in love, you know. So, like, I can only have faith and trust that my name is in the book of life, and that he knows my name, you know. And, like, but yeah, so that's how I look at it anyway. I don't hear God blaspheming my name, you know what I mean? But when I watch when I watch movies and stuff, and, like, all these Hollywood movies, like I pointed out, like, I do see them mocking and blaspheming my name, like in Hollywood, like Hollywood mock King J. I've showed some examples, but I don't feel like that's God doing that. I feel like that's the devil's doing that, like speaking against my name and trying to mock me and my name and speak of my name in vain and stuff like that, take my name in vain. So, like, but yeah, and then, like, how could God, suffering, Christ suffered so much, so, like, Christ suffered and like, God suffering, like, yeah, I'm sure I could never know what kind of suffering they go through, because I've never had a creation that's fully rebelled against me and turned against me and accused me of being wicked when I'm righteous or good, like, you know, like, things like that, except for vicariously, or when I'm in the world, or through God, or if I'm trying to, like, do a video like this where I'm trying to show love, and people still I'm trying to help people, yet people will try to accuse me of being wicked or being evil, you know what I mean? So it's like that's the only way I could know that kind of suffering. But I couldn't fathom what this kind of suffering it would be to be God. Well, I don't know if he has suffering or if he would even, why would he have suffering? He's God. He has all the power. He can remove all his suffering. I don't know if he's ever in suffering or ever going to be in suffering. I know I could see that his son was, but there's no knowing of God if I can relate to God, if God can relate to my suffering and I could ever relate to God's suffering, if he even does ever suffer. I can't imagine him having ever suffering because he's God. He has all power and authority. What does he have to suffer? You know what I mean? So like suffer us, his creation, being evil and wicked and having to witness that must hurt. I could never fathom that because I'm not him and I don't have the same perspective. You know what I mean? And vice versa. How could he ever understand my suffering being who he is? He's God. He never has to live with the uncertainty, the sadness, the loneliness, the not knowing, that uncertainty, that fear of God, the fear of not knowing if you're going to be condemned or go to righteousness or this and that. Like, I can only trust and have faith and be, do my best to be righteous and things like that, but still, you never know if you've said something that offends him or had a thought that came to mind that will offend him or the Holy Spirit or whatever, and or his son or anything like that. So God doesn't have to live with the fear of God. From our perspective, that'd be like him being scared of himself. So he doesn't have to live in fear and of not knowing and uncertainty and the pain of loss the same way that we do. And so he's God. He has powers and abilities that we don't. We're feeble humans that have way more suffering. Our bodies fall apart. We have uncertainty of ever knowing if we're ever going to heal or if we're ever going to love and find love or be able to share love in God, with God, or with the people that we love. And so from my point of view, we as humans suffer more than God or Christ can or ever will, from my perspective. But also, but how am I to know if they suffer more or not? From my perspective, they're God and Christ. They have abilities to heal. I could see that Jesus could heal things. I didn't see him suffering the same way that Job did with boils and this and that. Yeah, you can see him, like Job losing his wife and his kids and his animals and having things given to him then taken away. We can see that, yeah, he was on the cross, he got some physical pain and the suffering of being in the desert and things like that. But so we kind of relate to his suffering a little bit, but at the same time, it's like he was Christ and God was with him the whole time. He knows he's approved of the Father. He doesn't have to live with that same fear, that same uncertainty, or the same suffering. So that doesn't make any sense. Why it's always like, oh, Christ suffered so much and Christ suffered for us and suffered for us. Look at how much I'm suffering. I suffer every day. I've suffered for a prolonged period of time, for a decade, forever. As far as I know, I have to picture the woman that I loved and wanted to be my wife being with people that claim to be my friends, so I have to picture her in a post-traumatic state, being with all these men and being with other people, and it crushes me every time the thoughts pop up to mind. And there's nothing that I can do to ever eliminate these thoughts unless I get memory loss or Alzheimer's or something, or until God raptures me or wipes my memory or however it works. I don't see, that's the only thing that would make sense, that every tear would be wiped away. You would just, not care anymore because you're in a better place and you're in heaven, so you just don't care about earthly life anymore and you don't need anyone but God around you. You know what I mean? So, but I'm human, so they can't ever imagine that happening. I can trust and have faith that it will, but it's a suffering that's beyond a day on a cross, getting nailed to a cross, getting beaten and flogged. That's a physical pain. This is like an emotional, prolonged pain for over a decade, for over 12, 13 years. You know what I mean? And like, how could anyone ever know the pain of that loss, of how much I loved her and how much that hurt me? Like, does God share in that pain? No, because he doesn't have the uncertainty of being a human that I have. So he doesn't have the lack of abilities that I apparently have, or like, maybe I'm just lacking the faith, and even that, he wouldn't know what it's like to lack faith or to be uncertain, and to to feel hopeless at times and things like that. Like, he's God. How would he ever know that suffering? How would he ever know what it's like not to be him, not to be God and be in control and know that everything's going to be okay and that you're ever going to love again and that things are going to be okay? How would you ever know? How would he ever know that? So it's like, sometimes you just get it's kind of frustrating because you're hearing, he suffered for us. Oh, he suffers so much. About suffering. Oh, his suffering. Like, how much could you be suffering? You're God in Christ, God's Son, and you have abilities that are apparently far beyond anything that we can ever have, or we can share in them if you share the authority and your throne and powers with us and stuff like that. But reality is, as far as we know, we are never going to be exalted to, we can inherit and be heirs and God's children, but there's nothing that's saying that we're ever going to be one with Christ in abilities and certainty and faith and knowing and things like that. You know what I mean? So there's nothing, like, it's hard to hear, oh, Christ suffered so much. How much could you really be suffering when you're not fully, you're God's Son, and for God and his Christ, not fully human, partly or Christ is partly human, partly divine, or something. You know what I mean? But how could your suffering ever be worse than ours? And you know what I mean? Like that. So, and how could their suffering ever be worse than what the devils suffer? They choose it, but devils, they have to go to hell and condemnation forever, and yet we're supposed to be thankful for your suffering because that causes, that saves us from having to suffer what they suffer. What's with all this suffering? You know what I mean? Why is there so much suffering? If God's good, why is there so much suffering within his creation? Why hasn't he eliminated the beings that want to hurt? Because he's a good God, so he's letting them hurt, and he's giving them wrath and hurt, and that satisfies them, they want that. So it's why? It doesn't make any sense. How is that good, the suffering? And it's hard to process, but you know what I mean? So that's the perspective. Sometimes when I think about it, I'm like, how could you ever how could you ever relate to my suffering, or know my suffering, or suffer more than me, when you're not, being God, and all things considering who you are and your abilities and your position, and in reality, you couldn't. There's no way that God could ever suffer more than us. Well, like I said, only vicariously through us and through experiencing all the suffering of every being at once. But we have to suffer witnessing that too. So what? We all share in that suffering, but you don't apparently suffer having a human body that fails on you as you get older, and losing your abilities, or gaining someone you loved and losing them, except for the evil angels that you've lost and the people that you lose too. But still, you see what I'm saying? God's God. So that, considering that, how could you ever suffer as much as us, knowing that you're God and you'd never have to face condemnation? There's no possibility or threat that you ever will have to. You know what I mean? So for us, there's that possibility. That's a reality and a scary thing, and that causes lots of suffering. And and then we have our human lives, which is suffering because things don't go according to our plan. They go according to your plans. But even that, how could it obviously doesn't always go according to God's plan, because it repented God that he made man. Obviously it says that it wasn't God's plan for us to be evil and fall into evil, that his creation rebelled against him. So even that shows that it either doesn't always go according to God's plan, or it is part of God's plan for us to fall into evil, temporarily fall into evil, and so that he could be exalted through all the suffering and this and that. But so it says that it's not God's will for evil, so it didn't go according to his plan. He obviously doesn't want people, his will's not evil, it says, so he didn't want us to fall into evil. So that didn't go according to his plan. So how are we supposed to trust that in his plan, that it's going to go according to his plan, when we can see that it didn't already numerous times? Like, he flooded the whole earth, and then it repented him, and that he made man and all this. Like, it didn't go according to his plan. So how are we supposed to trust in his plan that it's going to? That doesn't make sense. And then or it did go according to his plan, and it is in his plan that we went into evil. And then if that is so, then why would that be part of his plan that we fall into evil? And then how could you punish us for it? You know what I'm saying? So either way, that doesn't make sense. So just based on that causes far more suffering than you could ever imagine or experience, and vice versa. Like, how could I ever know if God suffers more than me because he witnesses it all, and but I can't imagine his suffering being greater, his or his son's suffering being greater than mine. And it's not greater, being worse than mine is. It's not like a comparison thing. Like, it's not like I'm proud that I suffer. It's like, why am I suffering so much? And why do you get all this, you and your son get all this praise for what the suffering you endure. Meanwhile, you don't suffer the same way us humans do. Because you're God and Christ. So, I don't know, I try to be compassionate and sympathetic to other humans, because I realize, if I'm suffering this much as a human and I have to suffer this, I can only imagine the sufferings of other human beings. You know what I mean? I lost a woman. She wasn't even my wife. I wanted her to be my wife. So that causes suffering that I have the uncertainty of ever knowing if I'll ever have a wife or kids or anything like that, or anything to really actually care about and love. I could just be alone for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? And have to suffer that for the rest of my life, for all I know. And, I couldn't imagine that could have been a mercy to not have, from God, to have me not marry a woman that would treat me like that. That would have caused me even more pain if I would have married her and then she would have behaved that way. That could have caused me even more suffering. So that could have been a mercy for all I know. But still, you know what I mean? I know there's people who have been married and they get adultery committed and they have to lose the person that they care about. And I don't know the depths of other people's love and loss. I only know the depths of my love and loss. And I know it causes extreme pain, suffering, and post-trauma every single day for me since it happened. You know what I mean? It doesn't appear to ever go away, or heal. Time heals everything. That's nonsense. Nothing ever changes. Nothing's changing the past. Nothing can change what has happened or how I feel about it, except for if you find something better, fully move on and feel like, okay, I'm in a better spot now, and maybe it happened for a reason so I can be in this better spot, and so that I'm not stuck in a situation like that. But you see what I was saying? So from my perspective, I don't get the whole fuss about Christ suffered so much. Christ suffered so much. From what I can see, I can't see him ever suffering or having to suffer more and endure more than I am. And that's and even if like that's on God. How what I get put to death, so it's up to God if He gives me more suffering than Christ, and there's glory in suffering. Like I don't see the glory in suffering for love, because you're suffering for others, so it's suffering every day that I'm here. You know what I mean? I could, like, you could kill yourself, and then the loved ones that miss you, and they have to suffer without you, and so that would just cause suffering. So you're basically enduring suffering every day to just stick around and try to support and be there for the ones you love, but there's no guarantee that they're going to do the same or be there for you and love you the same, and it's just, there's that uncertainty. So I can't imagine God ever having to suffer that uncertainty, or His Son Christ doing so. So I don't see how it could be worse being God or Christ than it is being human. So, like, there's I'm told to have all this sympathy for Christ's suffering and all this suffering. It's like I see humans having to deal with more nonsense than apparently God will ever really have to deal with. Yeah, he has to deal with it and take it on himself because of us and our humans as creation all rebelled and went nuts and whatever, went to sin and all this, but it's like He was the only one who was ever in the position to stop that, other than Adam, Eve, and Lucifer. They made those choices, so it's like we were never in that. We were in the position to be able to stop the suffering and sin and things like that. God was, so, and He was in control of the circumstances that led up to it. So how are we supposed to think that that was not His will, that it all happened that way? Like, it doesn't make sense, because it's like, if He didn't want that to happen, if He really didn't want us to fall into sin and suffering and evil and all that, then why would you give access to a tree that you don't want them to go? Like, why would you give that possibility? So because you give the possibility for them to touch the knowledge of good and evil, it appears that it was your will for them to do that, so that this could all happen and unfold, and all this suffering happens, and so that God and His Son could be exalted through the suffering that we cause. But did we really cause it, or did God cause it for the whole situation being presented how it was presented? And there was no warning about the serpent, so how was Adam ever supposed to, how would he ever assume that the serpent or Eve were going to mislead him, when God, everything that he received and was given from God was good up to that point, and everything he was told from God was good except for that tree? So how would he ever assume, and why would he ever assume that Eve, who is called his helper, I'm going to make a helper and a wife, and then how would he ever think that she's going to mislead him and bring harm upon him? She's his helper. And then same with the serpent. How would he ever assume that the serpent that is in creation, that also apparently came from God, is wicked and would mislead him, when everything that he witnessed up to that point was good and was told to him to be good? So there was no warning about not following his wife or the serpent. There was no warning for that. He knew not that he wasn't supposed to touch the tree, but then there's other beings in existence. He has no concept of good and evil yet. So how could you punish him for not assuming that this serpent that is apparently from you is wicked as well? You didn't give him any warning about it. And same with, you didn't give him any warning about his wife. He would have seen that she ate it, and then he would have been like, oh, well, she didn't die instantly like God said. So he would have questioned that, and he would have been like, that doesn't, so what, did God lie? But yeah, they fell into sin and she fell into death, but not instant death right away. So he hadn't even seen death. How would he even have a concept of what death was? He's in heaven. Oh, you will surely die. Why would he fear that? He would have no concept of what that even was, of what death was. So why would he have any fear of that, or any concept of that? It doesn't make sense, so that part doesn't make sense. of the Bible. So what am I supposed to feel wrong for asking these questions and addressing these things and observing and sharing that perspective? God knows I mean no offense by it. I'm just asking questions and thinking. I'm not trying to be disrespectful or blame God or accuse God of anything. If you wanted me to know, then you'd let me know and you'd share that information. Until then, it's just a mystery to me. I have no clue. So I don't know if any of these thoughts are offensive to God or what. And I'm not trying to. He knows my heart. I'm not trying to offend him or blame him or anything like that. I just don't like suffering. Who does? God, apparently. Like, why? You're allowing it, so why? You like it? You like your son, you and your son suffering, or there's glory in suffering, or I don't get it. I don't understand. If God's good, why so much suffering? Oh, because his son's glorified through the suffering, and God and his son are glorified through suffering, and their willingness to love us through the suffering and to suffer for us, and this and that. It's like, you see a creation how can we view God as perfect when the creation's not? It's like creation is wicked. So then they're like, why even given that possibility? If God's the one who's all powerful and has control over that, it doesn't make sense that evil and wickedness could be in existence without God giving the possibility of it being there, which he clearly did from the story of the tree. So how could anyone ever conclude that wickedness and evil isn't a part of God's plan for us, that we're going to fall into wickedness and evil? Because God's not wicked, it says. So his word says that he's not evil and wicked. What's the difference between him being evil and wicked and letting his creation fall into it? How is that good? How is that good? How is it good for you to create? It's like I said, it's like like in a situation, like if a parent or father left the house and left children in the house and said, don't touch this poison tree, and then left the house, and then they came back and found them dead from touching that poison tree, that parent would be judged and thrown in jail for child endangerment. But if a parent or a father told his adult children, don't touch this tree, it's poison, and then came back in the same situation, they were dead, then those adults would be held accountable. They were adults. They could make their own decision. They were already warned about that. You can't make decisions for them, so then they would be responsible for that. And then the father and parent would have a hard time trusting other people in the house around that tree ever again. So he wouldn't trust beings in the house. So that apparently is the situation we're in. God doesn't trust to have people in the house until they prove that they are obedient and they trust him and they can take him at his word. So and that's the situation that we're apparently in. But still, a lot of it doesn't make sense from a human perspective. You're like, I don't see God suffering more, or having to suffer more than we are, and why so much suffering is being inflicted upon us for the decision of apparently these other beings that we inherited sin. So how is that fair that we are not given the same chance and opportunity? Because we are now, but we're not in the same circumstances. How can you expect humans to make the right choices in a corrupt environment that's full of sin when the first ones couldn't even make the right decision when they were in a beautiful paradise with less bad influences, and still Satan was there, and Satan apparently is still in the world today, and sin and evil and this and that. But there were less bad influences in heaven when Adam and Eve were there. They didn't have all these drugs and alcohol, cocaine, heroin, meth, all these crazy sins, lust, all these people to tempt you with lust and things like that. Like they didn't have even close to the same amount of bad influences. Yet they didn't make the right decision. So how could you ever expect us to be able to make the right decision in a way more corrupt environment with way more bad influences? How? Like how? How much hope do we have to be able to do that? You know what I mean? Like, we're under attack and suffering, and in a corrupt environment that's surrounded by bad influences. Like, and then, like I said, like, we're supposed to be the ones who are sorry and feel guilty and have to repent. Meanwhile, we're stuck around evil and bad influences and under attack by devils and kind of stuck in the crossfire of some war that we don't even understand, or even half the time most don't even want to be involved. You don't want to be involved in some war between, you see two sides warring, this side or that side. It says God will chew you up and spit you out if you're lukewarm, so you have to choose his side to be accepted, or you're condemned. But realistically, when people come to a war and they don't want to be involved in it, and they see two sides warring, and they're peaceful beings, they're like, I don't even want to get involved in this. Why do I have to be stuck in the crossfire of these both sides that are just warring? You're not even sure what they're warring about. What, you have to get involved? Like, what's fair about that? So that part doesn't really make much sense to me either. It's like I'm like, okay, well, I choose the good side, obviously, and I choose God and his son, and the side that apparently doesn't lead to suffering and that wants love, and their will is love instead of hurt and pain. But it's hard to believe that their will isn't hurt when they have all authority and it's still being allowed. So until it's not, then we can't see that suffering and hurt isn't their will. So all we can do is have faith, and I do my best to, But then, like, I have to hide when I have questions? Like, I just have to suffer in silence and not ask questions. How do you ever come to answers and conclusions if you don't ask questions? If you just ignore things? Like, if you're I'm not allowed to be honest about my thoughts and how I feel, and curious about God and the whole situation, or what's the deal with all this suffering and what's going on. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. But much love. I understand that humans suffer a lot. We suffer a lot, and I know I do. Like I said, I can never fathom, I can never comprehend other people, the depths of other people's love and suffering. I can only comprehend and fathom mine. So, and I know that it's deep. It hurt, like deep suffering, deep love. It's like, so, like, anyway, I still try to advise and teach to follow the greatest commandments, love God and all others as yourself, do your best to just be loving through it. You try to be loving of God and all as yourself through this suffering and this confusion and this mystery that, the veil that hasn't been lifted, which veil even are the same letters for evil, like veil, veil, and then evil, evil, veil, vile, vile, and so vile, evil, veil, live, also Levi, like the name Levi, or the genes Levi's, but yeah, I just want to share that. Anyway, much love. I encourage, like I said, do your best to love God and Jesus and all others as yourself through the pain and suffering. It sucks. It's hard to praise and be thankful for suffering and be repentant for inheriting suffering that apparently you didn't have the choice. You just inherited, and you're supposed to feel bad. Like I said in the other video, half the time you feel like the victim stuck in a situation that you feel like someone's supposed to be apologizing to you for being stuck in this evil and sin in this world of madness that you don't want. And the only way you can prove that you don't want that is by turning away from it. So that's what we have to do. We have to prove that we don't want evil and sin, and we have to turn away from it and prove that we don't deserve it any longer. And accept that maybe we did deserve it in the first place for what? The choices of Adam and Eve and others, and that, or when we were a kid and we don't know any better, but it says some of us will be found blameless, so anyway, I just wanted to share that. I always try to encourage and teach the 2 greatest commandments, to obey and love God and His Son, and live to love to live. I try to do my best to. I know it's hard. I clearly have thoughts and the odd doubt here and there. It's not easy when you're puzzling over these things and you don't have the certainty of knowing yet. You can have faith, and there's certainty in that. But it doesn't mean that I'm not in a vulnerable human body that is going to fail me as I get older, or although our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. So I like to hope that I'm growing in the spirit and getting closer and closer to God and love and not suffering. But is that just all describing the process of living and then dying and losing that suffering? But then it talks about what will happen after, and there's a second death apparently. This isn't enough suffering that we have to go through this suffering life. Then when you die, you could have done bad in life, and you may even have to go to more suffering. But God is good, though. Meanwhile, you've never known the reality of not having to suffer, because you've the uncertainty, or you've never been fully had everything and been provided for, had a wife and a garden of all the food provided and this and that. You've always had to worry about working and earning your living, and the stress of this, and the uncertainty of the world, and under threat of danger of creatures and humans and sin and all this. It's just madness, and we're supposed to be thankful for it, though, apparently, and love regardless. So that's what I do my best to do, but it doesn't mean that I'm supposed to not share these thoughts and questions. And is that offensive? I'm not trying to be disrespectful to God or His Son or anyone at all for it. I'm just sharing that I have suffering and I have questions, Anyway, and I just pray that I'm worthy to escape all these things, all this suffering, So anyway, much love. God bless. And when I was in my greatest moment of need and pain and suffering, I called out to God and through His Son Jesus, and related to Jesus, to God through His Son Jesus, and I called out, and He did answer me. I got some sort of response and answer. So it's He didn't abandon me in my moment of need and when I was crying out to Him. So that's why I do my best to trust and have faith in Him and praise Him and stuff like that. He hasn't failed me He didn't fail when I called out and I was in my moment of need. Not in the same way that humans have failed me, But then when I think about it, as far as I was it says God's never failing and this and that. So it's but He failed to protect Adam and Eve from the serpent and from themselves from making the wrong choices to touching the tree. So, but did He fail, or was that He warned them, but then, is that His failing as a parent and as God, or is that their failing as children and or as adults just to obey? That's on them that they don't. If you don't obey, it's on us if we don't obey God. It's not all on God if we disobey and fall into evil. That we make our own choices. So we can only. It's the same thing. We've been warned. Even now, the gospel. We're given warnings about this stuff. If we fall into this pit that's there that we've been warned about, this pit of sin, then how can we blame that on God that we fell into that pit of sin and went near it? God warned us about it, to not go near it and not touch it, so like that's the vibe that I get from the Bible a lot, is that how it's it's a lot of metaphorical stuff, like, oh, there's this big pit of sin and hell and destruction, and here's these warnings about it, and live this way like a son and you'll go to life, and then this way if you live the opposite you'll go to death, and this and that. So it's like, it seems more metaphorical warnings and things like that to me sometimes than it does a literal, you know what I mean? So when I'm trying to process a lot of these questions, I try to consider that, but there is some sort of warning there, and there's lots of wisdom in helping me to deal with this suffering and how to navigate this world of sin and suffering. So I appreciate that too, I can see the love that's in the Bible and in God's Word to try to help me navigate this world of sin and this suffering, and pointing out the pit and the evil of sin and helping me to try to avoid it, so I can see the spirit of love in that, so those are some of the reasons why I believe. And because God has shown me mercy and helped me in times when I called out to him when I needed someone, and in times where no one else did, you know what I mean? Like, there's been times when, like in the scriptures, when it says, like, oh, your mother and father may abandon you and all may abandon you, but I will never forsake you and abandon you, you know what I mean? And I've been like that. I've been like homeless on the streets, like feel like everyone, betrayed by everyone and abandoned by everyone, including my own parents, and I'm sleeping on my church lawn, but God was still there for me, and he answered me when I felt like dying. I remember a time when I felt like killing myself, like suicide, and I called out to God and Jesus, and I got some sort of a response, like they didn't just leave me and abandon me, so they were true to their word, to the words that are in the guidance that's there. Like, it was true, so it's like, that's part of the reason why I believe and have faith in their character and who they are. It says, like, God is close to the brokenhearted. I know I'm brokenhearted, and I reached out to him, and he was close to me, and he helped me at least deal with it. Like, it's still, all the suffering isn't healed yet and gone away, but still he helped me bear it, at least to the point where it's like, to the point where I could at least bear it, bearable, to a point where I could at least still have hope that I could maybe find someone in something better, and find love again with a woman, with a wife, and things like that. So it's like, I can still have hope in God and Jesus and in their character. That is where my hope is. It's in their character. Like, I don't have much hope for, like, people's character, except for the ones that live according to their word. But so those are some of the reasons. These are some of the reasons why I believe in God and Christ, is because they're there for me in a spiritual way. They were there, but they're not there in the physical. So that's the tough part. They're not there in the physical for me the same way that she was, or a woman can be. You know what I mean? So there's still that sense of lacking and loss. It's hard because thinking like, oh, God's in control, and oh, he could send me a good wife, but it's like, it's also on the women. You're relying on these women to be godly and make good choices. Like, God doesn't force them. He created them, but he doesn't make their choices for them. So, like, he could send a woman, and she could seem like the perfect match for you, you know what I mean? But it's like, people change and switch up on you, and God doesn't. That must be the hardest part, because it's like, how do you provide me a woman that you don't make their decisions for them? It's not like you force women to be obedient and feminine and righteous, so it's like, so that's it's hard believing, what I mean, that God can provide that. And when it's also on the women, you're relying on the women to be good, to be righteous, God-fearing, God-loving women, and well-behaved and obedient to the laws, because it's like, I don't know, it's the hardest part for me, is like, the and then like trying to balance, like that's what people do too sometimes, so they get mixed up and wrapped up in their suffering, and they blame God for all their suffering even though it's the people, so they can't draw the line between what the people were responsible for and what God's responsible for. God's responsible for his character and how he treats us and our relationship with him. He's not responsible for the choices of others, that the way that they treat us and things like that the world treats us. Like, he's not responsible for that. Like, he's only responsible for his character and how he behaves. It's just like me. I'm not responsible for how other people treat other people. I'm responsible for how I treat other people. You know what I mean? So it's like, I can't see why God wouldn't be the same. Like,
take you away from it all. From the hurt and the pain, out of the dirt and the rain, from this earth, it's insane. We'll just take you away from it. In your brain, how you deal with all the hate that is real and all the pain that you feel. Take it away from you. Cause nothing is worse than the unloving and cursed, so for whatever it's worth, I could just take you away from them. Who are there from the start and don't care in their heart, that wanna tear you apart. I would just take you away from them all.
Murders and wars, burglars and whores, guns and drugs, robbers, thugs and violent, not straight perversions, breaking and holy, unrighteous, unrepentant fighters, bombers and addicts, drama and static, soldiers, killers, illness, McMagic. The whole world is getting wild, pedophiles and dead a child, devils and demons, rebels and screaming wicked schemes, those sick and mean, drinking fiends who think unclean, cheaters unfaithful, evil and hateful, unthankful people, rude, ungrateful, the lustful and spiteful, Satan disciples, those yapping off, wrath and sloth, genocide, defending lies, and envy, pride, and sin inside.
Pain out of the dirt and the rain, from this earth, it's insane. We'll just take you away from it. In your brain, how you deal with all the hate that is real and all the pain that you feel. Take it away from you. Cause nothing is worse than the unloving and cursed, so for whatever it's worth, I could just take you away from them. Who are there from the start and don't care in their heart, that wanna tear you apart. We'll just take you away from them all.
Slews and sleazes, flus and diseases, bruises and lesions, unbelievers of Jesus Christ, blasphemy, money, smoking, misery, cults, blame, guilts, faults, mocking, shame, not walking lame, bullies, vicious, hurting, malicious, what's daunting, taunting, haunting, flaunting and wanting, bad intentions, mad inventions, sadness, intentions, aggressions and stress, confusions, unrest, solutions and mess, contusions and pests, suppressors, crime, wasting time, madness and weapons, sadness, depression, division, troubles like a vision, struggle.
The hurt and the pain, out of the dirt and the rain, from this earth, it's insane. We'll just take you away from it. In your brain, how you deal with all the hate that is real and all the pain that you feel. Take it away from you. Cause nothing is worse than the unloving and cursed, so for whatever it's worth, I could just take you away from them. Who are there from the start and don't care in their heart, that wanna tear you apart. I would just take you away from them. From the hurt and the pain, out of the dirt and the rain, from this earth, it's insane. We'll just take you away from it. In your brain, how you deal with all the hate that is real and all the pain that you feel. Take it away from you. Cause nothing is worse than the unloving and cursed, so for whatever it's worth, I could just take you away from them. Who are there from the start and don't care in their heart, that wanna tear you apart. We'll just take you away from them. From the hurt and the pain, out of the dirt and the rain, from this earth, it's insane. We'll just take you away from it. In your brain, how you deal with all the hate that is real and all the pain that you feel. Take it away from you. Cause nothing is worse than the unloving and cursed, so for whatever it's worth, I could just take you away from them. Who are there from the start and don't care in their heart, that wanna tear you apart. I would just take you away from them all. See you in my mind, you know I won't give you up. I think about you all the time. You would always be in love if you could see into my heart dreams, baby. Then you know if you could see it through my eyes, you'd see you're always beautiful. You'd see you're always here with me. You'd see I much I love you so. I know you would fall in love, you would never want to go. I know you would fall in love, you would never want to go. You'd see you're always here with me, you'd see how much I love you so. If you could see it through my eyes, you'd see you're always beautiful. If you could see it through my heart dreams, baby, then you know. I just can't figure it out. Who I just keep thinking about. Just keep bringing me down. I don't know what's going on in my head. I just can't figure it out. Just keep bringing me down. Who I just keep thinking about. I don't know what's going on in my head. I just can't figure you out. Who I just keep thinking about. Just keep bringing me down. I don't know what's going on in my head. You'll never know how much I think about you, how much you drive me crazy, how much I wish you were aware. You'll never know how much it hurts my heart. Life, how I wish that it were fair. You'll never know how much I miss you, how much I want you to be here, how much I wish that I were there. You'll never know how much I love you, want you, need you to know. You'll never know how much I care. For you I try to do all that I can do, but it's hard to understand you. I just can't figure it out. Who I just keep thinking about. Just keep bringing me down. I don't know what's going on in my head. I just can't figure it out. Just keep bringing me down. Who I just keep thinking about. I don't know what's going on in my head. I just can't figure you out. Who I just keep thinking about. Just keep bringing me down. I don't know what's going on in my head. Your mouth said you love me, but your actions said you don't. My head wants it to work to trust you, but my heart says it won't. Because my heart knows words speak louder than actions. Never, no matter what we try to lie to my heart, it knows I deserve better. If you truly love me, deserve me, we would still be together. You wouldn't have hurt me and hurt us forever. Although, even though I know people make mistakes, there's no fixing a heart. Trust once it breaks, it's broken. I just can't figure it out. Who I just keep thinking about. Just keep bringing me down. I don't know what's going on in my head. I just can't figure it out. Just keep bringing me down. Who I just keep thinking about. I don't know what's going on in my head. I just can't figure you out. Who I just keep thinking about. Just keep bringing me down. I don't know what's going on in my head. I just can't figure you out. Who I just keep thinking about. Just keep bringing me down. I don't know what's going on in my head. I don't wanna lose my mind every time I think about you. I don't wanna hurt inside every time I think about you. I don't wanna have to cry every time I think about you now. Every time I think about you, thinking of another guy, thinking how I live without you, thinking of all the things that I have to think about you. I don't wanna have to hide everything I think about you now. And every time I think about you now, I can't act like I want it. But what's the point if you can't be honest? To me, you're not fair, and to me, you're not there. For me, how I want you to be. Can't act like you love me truly. I could never trust you now. I wish I could, but I don't know how. So it's time to throw in the towel. I don't wanna lose my mind every time I think about you. I don't wanna hurt inside every time I think about you. I don't wanna have to cry every time I think about you now. Every time I think about you, thinking of another without you, thinking of all the things that I have to think about you. I don't time I think about you, I don't wanna hurt inside. Every time I think about you, I don't wanna have to cry. Every time I think about you now. Every time I think about you, thinking of another guy, thinking how I live without you, thinking of all the things that I have to think about you. I don't wanna have to hide everything I think about you now. And every time I think about you now.